This is why the country is screwed. There's not enough me's. There's too many yous.
Yeah, a country full of yous. That's just what this world needs.
Shit would get done.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Spoiled Games. Hey, before you watch this, a warning. It's called Spoiled Games for a reason. We're going to spoil a game, in this case, Grand Theft Auto 5. So if you haven't played it to completion, do that, come back. You're going to enjoy this a lot more, and probably it will make a lot more sense. But with that out of the way, yes, Grand Theft Auto 5, the top-selling piece of entertainment of all time, is going to be discussed. And here to join us to do that is Editor-in-Chief of Giant Bomb, Jeff Gerstmann.
Hey,
Thank
Adam,
you so much.
Great to be here.
And joining us from New York City, we have Editor-at-Large, from Polygon, it's Chris Plante. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
So, yes, the game was wildly successful. We can talk about sort of why that was the case, a little later on. Mm-hmm. But, to start things off, what really struck me when I started playing Grand Theft Auto 5 is that there really isn't sort of a core framework that says I'm a Grand Theft Auto game. If you compare this to 3, if you compare this to 4, they really are so different in style. I didn't know what, outside of the sandbox, what is the core essence of Grand Theft Auto?
I think that they start with the story. First and foremost, they start by introducing you to these characters and kind of setting up that stuff. And I think that was the biggest difference for me is, kind of the way that they work with those 3 different protagonists and the way that they tell that story. That's the stuff that ended up feeling really different to me. Other parts of it, you end up in that sandbox and you're like, okay, these are a lot of the same jokes. It's still a lot of driving, all that other stuff. But that was the thing for me that really set it apart.
I think one thing, and you probably noticed this too, Chris, was some of the camera work that was quite flashy at the beginning as you're getting through the opening credits after the prologue really stood out as, okay, this is Grand Theft Auto, but it's definitely something that's trying to address sort of modern expectations of presentation.
Yeah, I think they've found ways to incorporate film camera work into the introduction of your playing these little moments. I don't know how to describe this very well, but they use this kind of handy cam look whenever you transport into a character. And it kind of is there for about 15 seconds of play, and it gradually pulls back into what you expect a third-person game to look like. And they've really snuck those cinematic while playing moments in while still giving you control of the camera and not really taking it away from you. It's really bizarre, and I still really haven't figured out how they did it.
Well, and also, I think the effect on me playing it, I felt I had a different relationship to this game than many other games. There's probably a ton of reasons. The 3 characters, but the way they added that visual drama, I think I felt maybe a little more invested or a little more excited when I was sort of in it, because it was kind of, I don't want to say playing a movie, but I'm playing something that feels very important.
Well, I feel like they really just stepped up their game in their storytelling. They've always been full of, solid characters and all this other work that they've done in previous Grand Theft Auto games, but this was the one where it felt like, they really took all that stuff a lot more seriously about how they were telling their story. They considered things like, okay, what are the types of missions that this character would do, and it's the things that were afforded them by going the route with the 3 characters is like, okay, you can have Michael's story be about this dramatic arc with his family and all this other stuff. You can have Franklin's kind of get up out the hood kind of story be told. You can have Trevor's insanity and have that all fit and have missions all written to fit those characters instead of just having someone like Nico that you have that dissonance of like he's just trying to get out, but he'll happily mow down everybody in his way to get there and all that other stuff.
Yeah, there was definitely, there wasn't that same dissonance between sort of what you're doing and what the character's supposed to be like. One of the other things, Chris, I couldn't help but notice is I didn't have to wait 5 hours to do the thing I've been wanting to do. That, these characters at various stages of life, they finally said, hey, you don't have to, as I put it, eat your vegetables to finally get to dessert in Grand Theft Auto 5. Like, from the outset, you're engaging in gunplay and you have fast cars. I think that might be one of the key reasons I felt like I really wanted to see this game to completion, whereas I think I've been more challenged to do that in some of the other titles.
Yeah, do you know what I think it is you don't have to take jobs. For me, every other Grand Theft Auto game, you start out and it's like, well, now you can work at a taxi shop, and now you can work for this guy who deals pot, and you work for like 100 people before you work for yourself. And in this game, so much of the story is about that, is I don't want to be the servant of any master. That to me is the story of this game. And while I don't think it does an especially great job of sticking to that arc, I think in the end that's what it's about. And I think that is more empowering, because that's what you want to do when you play this game. You don't want to be the servant. You want to go do these wild, crazy things.
Well, it's funny, like the way that I don't want to be a servant of any master. Looking at kind of, I think a film that did a fairly good job of that was American Beauty. And once again, it's a character that, while charismatic, is pretty awful and doesn't care much for the people in his life. And
Sure.
we really see that with definitely Trevor and definitely with Michael. And I think we can also argue that with Franklin. And I know this has come up, that are these characters so despicable that you don't want to play them? But I have to say, there is a charismatic allure. At the same time, I know there's something very unpleasant about it.
I think that these are characters that have things that they want and things that they are willing to do to get what they want, and that's that's business at some level. I mean, you can obviously they're engaged in deeper, far more criminal business, but that's kind of the ambition of American business in a lot of ways too.
No, and I really found this to be one of the angriest games I've ever played. That there seemed to be just like a level of simmering fury at kind of contemporary life and contemporary values, that they've touched on that with other Grand Theft Autos, but there seemed to be something a little bit more distilled and, I guess, sincere. And Chris, I was curious, like, how you felt about the tone of this game.
Yeah, I think it's weird. When I wrote my review, I said that I don't think it's as cynical as previous games, which is weird because it's profoundly cynical. But GTA 4, I just couldn't be in that world. And I live in New York, and that is not New York. That is New York of like the 1970s, where you couldn't walk 2 steps without like running into a porn shop and being offered crack. And the reality is, like, New York is Disneyland. It has been basically since the day Michael Bloomberg walked into office. So going to that place is not a place I wanted to be. Their version of LA is so much closer to my experiences of being in LA, and maybe that's why I don't feel like it's cynical, because it's how I generally feel when I'm there, and I want to do some of the horrible things while I am there. So I don't know. Maybe it's just a matter of location. Which is,
LA's a terrible place.
No,
it's a terrible place.
As a man who lived there for a long time, it was almost kind of uncanny how, yes, it was an accelerated version of reality, but one that really knew what the reality was.
You're just going through, like, just checking off, like, I've met that guy.
Yeah,
I've met that guy. I've met that guy.
But to that point, that there has always been such a role of media kind of dictating people's value systems in Grand Theft Auto games, that it feels less. I mean, LA is where most of the media we really don't like comes from, and it's because it is the entertainment hub that seems to foster this very superficial and materialistic value system in its residents. That maybe I almost started to wonder if Grand Theft Auto, by its nature, just should always be in Hollywood. It really, that's where their commentary really seems to resonate the most.
I think so too. At the same time, I feel like their commentary has not changed in a lot of ways, like tonally. I mean, it seems like it's coming from the same place. Like the things that Rockstar has to say about America, you could just remove the 3 things that were current the last time they did it and plug in, what is it? It's like fracking, it's the Chinese, it's outsourcing, it's immigration. Like they just plug in whatever the hot button issues are, but it all comes from the exact same place, no matter where they set the game. And that actually really rubbed me the wrong way at the start, because it made the game feel old. Here it was like, the characters and the story they're trying to tell felt very new. It felt like a very interesting way to tell that story, but it was wrapped around this husk that just felt like very old. And after probably about 10 hours of like feeling like, I don't know that I like this game very much at all, it all started to click. And in this weird way, it was nostalgia, It was like this, like, oh, it's like, all these dumb jokes coming from the same dumb place. Like, that's all right. Like, I kind of like what they're doing with the radio, I guess, even though they haven't really changed a lot. It was a very weird, game for me.
It's interesting because I see exactly what you're saying, that there's that sense of the familiar in how they're looking at it. I just felt that for the first time, the humor that I appreciated but never really kind of affected me, be it laughter or anything in the other games, here it just felt so much more pointed. Like, this was like, just the rage against, the love of the iFruit, and, when that kind of that mixture of Steve Jobs and many other
Zuckerberg and all that stuff.
Zuckerberg.
Yeah. I thought that stuff was really great. I think that's the difference, is that this time a lot of the humor is part of that core main story. Like in a lot of ways, like they don't take a full step in this direction. Like they kind of half step, they hedge a little bit, but they almost wrote an action comedy.
Yeah.
With some of the writing, some of the dialogue. Oh, absolutely,
comedy,
yeah. I mean, way more action than comedy. I mean, it's still a video game. You still need to, have conflict. But a lot of the writing in the main story isn't about that. I've got to get a leg up. I've got to become a better criminal. Instead, it is, like they're just full of doing sight gags of like hear no evil, see no evil, like all that sort of stuff at different spots in that game, and that's all part of the main story. I think that to me is the biggest difference. Is it's not Brucey. You're not encountering these side characters that are funny. It's that the writing of the main characters, like Trevor has legitimately funny dialogue in that game.
Yes.
And that to me was the biggest step forward, I think, for them.
Well, but when they did decide to go topical, and you know what, I don't recall them actually addressing something as head-on. In many cases, they didn't. The side quest involving their version of the Minutemen, and the idea that here's this kind of asinine, quasi wannabe patriot, and his sidekick is only speaking Russian and somehow has also gotten wrapped up in that. Yeah. That there is something so deliciously absurd and rather pointed at just, it didn't feel like it even needed to make the case of the frustration with the ideals of the Minutemen. It's just like, no, I already hate them. I'm just going to go in this kind of nutty way with that. I found that to be a little eye-opening and I almost say refreshing, because it didn't feel like it had to kind of telegraph that, hey, we're going to make a message over here, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, they've been compared to, Breaking Bad or Sopranos, whatever the popular television show is whenever a Grand Theft Auto game comes out. But more so than ever, I think the Hauser brothers are the Lars von Trier of video games, and that their view of America, while a fair criticism in some ways, is also wildly off and such a European idea of what is bad about America. And I think it works a little better now because thanks to globalization and social media, everyone hates, the iFruit. Like, these are things that are universally worthy of criticism. And I think that's why it works a little bit better. I also think it works better because LA is on film. Like, if you lived in London, you still know what LA was in 1980 or 1990 or yesterday. While New York is a little bit harder to pin down, I think, than that. But yeah, I think the action comedy thing is perfect. I mean, this is Lars von Trier does Lethal Weapon. Like, if you can, these three people working together and also hating each other in the filth of America that got them this far.
As just a cinematic concept, what you just described there is something I think I need before I die.
Right. Let's get that movie made.
Yeah, Anti-Weapon or something like that. Let's talk a bit about the characters. I think we know that having the three really afforded the story to go in these interesting directions, and but it really highlights the fact that we play a lot of games. Even if it's something like Last of Us and definitely something like BioShock Infinite, the assumption is that you are playing a character, but you are supposed to be one with the character. And here, you really are kind of probably the most passive observant, I guess, of sort of the story. It's not asking you to identify or to bond or to feel with any one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that works really well to help establish those characters and helps make the story work. And it can work against it in some spots too, where when they take chances and they go in directions that are unexpected, some of them I think worked really well, and some of them, when Trevor goes to torture that guy, it's like, that doesn't seem like something that the Trevor that I've been playing as would do, and wouldn't be this flip about it. Like, it just seemed really out of place. So, and on some level, it's just the first person versus third person thing when you talk about stuff like BioShock and how people identify with that character and view that story. Is, if you've got all these third person cutscenes and all this other third person stuff, you're gonna think about it a lot differently. But I think it's a factor of multiple things there.
You went ahead and brought up the torture scene, so let's get into it now, Chris. I know you have feelings on that. I'm going to be frank. I actually, while I was cringing and turning away, I actually really liked is such a horrible word, but let's just say for the sake of convenience, liked it and really felt that it was in place. Trevor was crazy, and it was almost like a reminder, like, don't like this guy too much.
Yeah.
He's kind of, it was a problem that Sean Ryan said he had with The Shield, where Vic Mackey, and probably by virtue of the acting of that character, the audience was too forgiving of him. And that, A, this was a reminder of that he is a sadist, but also, it was a blackly comic way of showing, of expressing disgust for the idea of torture, especially given the fact that you are never, as the player, given any sense of confidence that anything to the benefit of national security actually happened, and that it was just, another authority's selfish desire
that's
get
the commentary
ahead,
they're really making there.
followed by what I thought was the most chilling, I mean, not laugh out loud, but chillingly humorous exchange in the car with the torture victim on their way to the airport. It was one of those things, I knew it was going to be controversial, and I was stunned at the beginning, but as it played itself out, I'm like, you know what? This kind of fits within that sort of primal rage that seems to be the underpinning of this game. Now, Chris, I know from your review, you really took exception to it.
Well, I'm going to do a weird sidestep, and thank goodness this is a spoiler cast, because this is something I've wanted to talk about for a while that haven't found the right place. I think that moment is not my favorite, to say the least. At least I get the argument of why it was some type of cultural satire or something. The moment that really bothered me was when Trevor kills Lloyd's girlfriend.
Yes, yes.
And this is after he's sodomized her teddy bear and like left his stuff on it, and then you see it strapped to his car. And what was so upsetting about that for me is throughout the rest of the game, Trevor is that guy who makes you flinch. You know, he's a bully at your school he's like, what's a Hertz donut? And you're like, not this again. And you don't know if it's going to be the time he hits you in the elbow. But he's not somebody that does something that violent in the context of the story, which is weird because he's doing violent things when you're playing as him. But he's just never that far. And what was so upsetting about that, especially to me, is here is the one strong female character in the entire world of the game, and she shows up for 5 seconds, and she's like a self-made woman, and you just brutally murder her. And that, to me, I couldn't get past. And it ruined the character for the rest of the game for me. I'm fine with it now that I'm post-game, and it's like, they're kind of meaningless. But I could not get on board with him after that. And I still don't really know what they were trying to say with it. I don't know what it really serves other than, like, well, Trevor's dangerous. Well, no shit. I kill cops with my rocket launcher, 500 times an hour. I don't need more convincing.
Well, I mean, I guess one way I started, and you know what, it really did stand out to me too, and I found it interesting that in sort of the post-release discussions that came up, I knew the torture scene would be there, but there was something a lot more like, whoa, hold on. He comes across as a far more carnivorous human being, I think, in that sequence, and all those intimations that he might actually practice cannibalism. It's something like, hold on, there might be some validity there.
I feel like they're not sure who they want Trevor to be with that. They want him to seem crazy. They know, unless there's something deep hidden in there that I haven't found, they never show him using meth, but it's heavily implied that he's a meth user. He seems like he's just kind of all over the place with that stuff. When you first meet
him, the woman he's with is
absolutely,
smoking.
Yeah. Sure. So you can imply at that point a lot of things. But I think my problem with the torture sequence is they didn't set it up one way or the other. Like he walks into it and is just kind of like, all right. There's no, he's not gleefully participating in it. He's not disgusted. He doesn't feel trapped by it. It's just this like, okay. It ends up not really saying much of anything about his character to me.
I mean, I thought I saw Glee there. That like
maybe you chose different utensils that
maybe you're right. Maybe there's a right path for that. But then in that talk that he has following, where he's pointing out that torture doesn't really serve any purpose. It's really just for the satisfaction of of the sadism, which is how I kind of read why he was so willingly able to assist these people he absolutely despised in the FIB.
Yeah, it just, to me, it ends up coming across as multiple people writing that character or something. And, maybe that just kind of plays into him being unpredictable, but I feel like they didn't nail that aspect of his character well enough to sell it through the entire game. When the stuff happens later on with the woman, with the girlfriend there in that apartment, like at that point, he's a motivated criminal. And, to me, that just struck me as like, here's an obstacle in his way. He deals with it because he's got shit to do. And that didn't really bother me that much. And the torture didn't. I got a little squeamish because it was like, oh, did I really need to control this?
Which
Like,
I think
what are
was
we doing?
the
Maybe that's
intended.
the intent.
I don't think anyone expected you to go like, oh my God, I'm having so much fun.
But
here.
I mean, think about how the conversation about torture has changed. I mean, if we were having this conversation in the early '90s, it'd be like, Reservoir Dogs was awesome, man. It's cut that guy's ear off. So it's recreated that scene. It's I think a lot of it is just standards have changed on that stuff, and people view it a lot differently. But if we are willing to accept that back then, you could have a good, compelling torture scene and not have to think about all the consequences, I can see why they would attempt to do it here too.
I mean, in terms of the scene with the girlfriend, I mean, the only thing I can think of is he was so obsessed with playing house and those really kind of creepy moments where you might actually land into that building and he's spooning Floyd there in the bed, that, he kind of had this wonderful control of some sort of idealized life. And she was wrecking it. I mean, a lot of the themes, and very much with Michael in this game, is just the main characters and the FIB and all these people in the world. It's this narcissistic self-delusion. Like, no one can recognize they're doing anything wrong, which I think is actually very indicative of living in LA. But like another thing, like watching sort of what's been going on in the news, a senator like Ted Cruz would work perfectly in the world of Grand Theft Auto 5. And I think just because I found these people to be so kind of, I don't want to say like lost, like they are so past the point where I should even begin to think about them as legitimate carbon-based human beings I care about. I think I just did not react to some of the more noxious things in the game with the same disgust. It was almost kind of, it was like a Jacobean revenge fantasy where you kind of get your thrills watching bad people just tear each other apart.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question? You mentioned the meth. And the drug use in this game is something I've really been wanting to talk about.
Oh, but
because
please.
I don't understand it. The one thing I feel like the House Brothers and Rockstar in general get is Coke. And boy, do they get it. Because they have a great Coke character in every one of their games, including Red Dead, where there didn't need to be a great Coke character. But then, on the flip side, their idea of meth is strange. And then worse is their perception of pot, where if you smoke it at home, you're just kind of goofy and you talk a lot. But then there are these missions where there's a pot advocate in some park, and the three characters can meet with him, and they have 3 different reactions. And to go over just really quick, Michael smokes pot, and he sees aliens, which he shoots with a machine gun. Trevor smokes pot, and he sees clowns. And this is where it's weird, Franklin smokes pot, and nothing happens. And so the question being, it's obviously not normal pot, because normal pot you smoke in your house and you have a normal pot effect. So it's pot with something like PCP in it, even though this isn't actually what you would experience if you were on PCP. Why is Franklin immune to PCP?
Because he's not an old man that is used to smoking 70s weed.
Oh, sure.
I mean, I don't think I would look for such a literal. It's like, for whatever reason, the pot unearthed some sort of internal anxiety, and Franklin is such an even-keel character in this world. Yeah, I mean, I love the idea that he's afraid of clowns. It doesn't work as well, I think, with the aliens. And what I did find curious about that one side mission is you can encounter the first one so quickly.
Right.
That I was like, whoa, this game just got strange.
Like they're just trying to take Saints Row back or something. Like
they've never played Saints Row.
Oh, right. They don't even know what it is.
Well, and,
I actually kind of believe them. They probably haven't. They haven't played any game other than their own in the last decade.
But there is that sequence in the middle when Michael's finally abandoned by the last remaining member of his family that pretends to even care about him. It's his son, and he suddenly has I thought it was a pretty fun, nice interlude of the drug trip.
Yeah.
His movements while through the city is reminiscent to Saints Row 4, which had only finished a couple of weeks earlier.
Yeah.
I'm just going to leave that on the table as is. But let's use that to talk a little bit about Michael, where I think because Trevor's so broad, you don't really understand that Michael is he's awful. And his family might not be great, so you may not realize what he's doing to them, but it's also quite possible his family is that bad because he's just so self-absorbed and just miserable.
Yeah. Yeah, he really is. He really is.
Chris, what was your take on Michael?
Well, I'm actually fine with Michael because at least he's a character that makes sense in the context of Grand Theft Auto protagonist. So congratulations, they made one. But that final act where everything has gone to shit, and you need to make this heist work, but then you just take a lot of time to become a movie producer, and suddenly everything doesn't really matter anymore, and then you get a call from your family who's like, "We've forgiven you. You've made such great strides," and you're like, "What strides have I made? I haven't changed at all. Like you basically gave up. Like it was a war of attrition, and now we can go to the therapist and work this out." Yeah, he's weird.
I mean, the transitional moment, if memory serves me correctly, is he clocks the yogi, well the yoga instructor, too,
right.
not the yogi.
Yeah.
And somehow, I mean, I got the sense that this isn't, it was tenuous at best, that the wife really was just getting fatigued with, her distraction with the yoga instructor.
I think that's definitely part of it. I think they try to roll the movie producer storyline into that as well, so he can say, like, look, I'm out here making something of myself as a legitimate businessman, even if the missions, tell a very different story. But to me, that stuff, even if it is kind of a weird detour where they put it in the story, like I think it works really well for Michael's character, where there's this just like, I just love old movies and I just want to get in. Like he'll drop anything to be in the movie business and to be to have that brush with fame and all that other stuff. Like it's a very weirdly natural reaction, I think, for a lot of guys that that they set up as like kind of loving old film and that sort of stuff.
And loving old film that gives a romanticized vision of what he actually does for a living.
Right.
And this I believe was also a line in The Sopranos in the second or third season, where you start to show this, I'm a gangster, but I want to be the gangster as people would like gangsters to be.
Right. Yeah.
And
I think it's a really interesting line they walk with that. I think the arc with his family, I think, works out really well. His story, I mean, I don't know if you guys visited the therapist a lot. I tried to visit it as often as possible. And it just, at some point, it's like, are they just like, Rockstar always has the movie, right? Whenever they put out a GTA, you can almost ask, like, well, what are the movies? Like, what are they? They used to actually just show, at preview events, they would just show clips of, like for San Andreas, it was just like, here's Juice, here's all the, the obvious stuff. They didn't do that for this one that I know of, but it almost felt like they're like, analyze this and analyze that in some weird way. This weird kind of like comedy, it's just latter also, period De Niro thing. You're like, this is a weird thing to draw from. But
the therapist felt oddly familiar as a stereotype. It was that kind of L.A. smarmy. It was one of those things like, and it was true for like a lot of the characters. Like I couldn't put my exact finger on where the source was, but I knew that there was a source. Or there was kind of a concept that they were playing off of.
Yeah.
Once again, I lived in LA for 9 years. At some point, you are going to go to a therapist.
And it'll probably be a guy like that.
Now, with those two characters, which are obviously the older, very pronounced characters, I thought that Franklin, I was more impressed. I actually stayed interested in Franklin as long as I did. I wouldn't say that I maintained an incredible interest in him much at all, but Chris, you're laughing.
You're probably more interested in him than they were, because my favorite moment with Franklin is at the end of the game when you have to go and do those final hits on all of your people, right? And they're like, Michael, you've got this person and this person. Like, oh yeah, and like Trevor, you've got the Chinese. Like, oh sure, okay. And like Franklin, you got. Somebody, Skinny Pete? Was it Skinny Pete? There was somebody named something.
Yeah, there was the guy.
Court.
Wasn't it the guy that left prison that has kind of gotten him and his crazy buddy into a lot of trouble? Anyway.
His story made no sense. But the real issue for Franklin with me is they decide to do this story of, the guy in the ghetto, like the cliche, like bad boys in the hood type of story. And they drop the N-word like it's their job at the beginning. I mean, it is like every other word. And you know what? Fine. There are plenty of white writers who have done that to great effect, David Simon being the obvious one. What I didn't like was basically wussing out from there. Like, they just didn't choose to actually tell a story about people who live in an area like this. And it became like, well, he's just another guy who doesn't make a lot of money, and he has like a crack addict person in his life. So that must be what the poor experience is. And it's too bad, too, because I think what they intended to do was have Michael, who is this, exhibit of wealth and has everything he wants and continues to put himself in harm's way out of the need for excitement, and contrast it with Franklin, who is someone who just wants a leg up. And they just don't do it. At every opportunity they have to talk about that, they instead they focus on Michael as his father figure, and they basically forget to say anything about Franklin. And I think that's really what happens. I think Michael's story takes way, and then Franklin just kind of gets pushed to the side.
But then come the end of the game, it almost feels like they're trying to loop back around and make Franklin sort of the main character. Like those final missions, you have to make the decision as Franklin. What do you want to do with these other guys? Like, and it's sort of weird because they haven't built him up enough at that point. You know, they talk about the lady in his life that is off, marrying someone else, and I felt that they were going to do more with that at some point. They do have her show up at one point, but it's almost this incidental. She shows up at the very end and says, "You need to go do this." I'm like, okay.
I started to actually wonder if they began to think that the player would actually be doing that identification with Franklin. There's a point in the game where you start to look at Franklin almost anxiously seeing Michael and Trevor as the two adult paths that are available to him. And I don't think when you have these very, very well-written characters, or just there's so much writing that really draws out the character of Michael and Trevor, that just by underwriting Franklin and not giving him sort of as strong a personality, that the player would necessarily go like, oh, that's me. And then it doesn't. Yeah. It also confuses things in like what happens when you play the other characters. But by the end, that's how I started to see it. Is you're supposed to choose your adult path.
They hint at it and never quite go all the way with it. And we can only really guess at the reasons. I mean, I would say at some point, they've already told that story with San Andreas when they put San Andreas out, like that kind of Compton level story of just like this is going to be. Your gangster business, like that sort of stuff, they've already addressed.
And I do have to wonder, I do not think San Andreas with that storyline would have gone over very well, in this day and age. I mean, they are starting to sort of play in a mythology and a reality that, and they also regarded romantically.
Yeah. They put that game out at a time, like they put San Andreas out at a time when the desire to have that kind of hood movie experience in a video game, I feel like they hit it just right when they put that game out. Like that was very well timed on their part.
And I think that was an issue with this game and with Franklin was his friend character. What's his name? Who shows up on online?
Lamar.
Lamar is a really well performed character who's totally underused, and hopefully he'll show up more in online. But Lamar is this voice of, why are you trying to rise above your social status? Which is a really incredibly fascinating and realistic question, and a thing that happens to people that is sad, where people are, by their peers asked, why are you trying to climb? And that's great and interesting, and it is totally ignored. It is, again, just something that is, things are said at Franklin and then never answered. And that, I think, is just the big disappointment.
Well, and Franklin isn't that despicable. It's just like there isn't that sense of universally all three characters are equally have some kind of flaw that kind of pushes you away. There really isn't anything there with Franklin, and it's like, I I actually was really happy when he got to the big house. I'm like, look at you. You made it.
Yeah.
And you have all these clothes that you can play with, and I guess even at that moment, Franklin's kind of like, I got things to do.
Yeah.
He never seems stressed, nor does he seem grateful.
Yeah, it's a story about recognizing who you are. That's the whole Michael thing. When the therapist finally tells him that, and it's like he realized, I'm a criminal. That's why his wife likes him again when he punches the yogi, because it's like, oh, you're back. The man I loved is back. And you want to make movies. You know who you are. And Trevor obviously always knows who he is. Franklin gets that message from his ex-girlfriend at the end, and it's supposed to be a powerful moment. But all you're left wondering is, well, who is he? Like I have no idea, and I don't think he does, and I don't think the writers do.
Yeah, I feel like they don't resolve that stuff, and that they do head in that direction. But at the same time, I can't blame them for not necessarily walking all the way down that road, because it kind of is the most cliched story for that genre of just we've got to get out of the hood. all right, we made it out of the hood, but a lot of people died along the way. Like, that is literally...
Yeah, it's interesting because it is about LA, because of the existence of San Andreas. Was there just a sense that we can't go back there and not have something that's reminiscent of what the original game was? And that's why it isn't as fleshed out and goes to as many interesting places as the Michael and Trevor storyline. So
yeah, maybe.
Well, so we haven't gotten too much of the gameplay, and I want to touch on a little bit of that. That core mechanic of the heist. Which I thought the first time it happens with the music, with that sense, I mean, that was remarkably invigorating.
Yeah.
And I think there are other moments that got really exciting, but I think the rest of the gameplay was strong enough that those elements didn't actually sing for me like I expected them to, especially not after that first one, which really kind of struck a high point.
I don't know. I really liked all the setup involved. You have to choose like which path you're going to take, and I pretty much always chose the one that wasn't just running guns blazing, because like literally the rest of the game is that.
Running guns blazing.
So,
yeah.
It was nice to have like, okay, we're going to try and sneak around a little bit and try and do something crazy. And be a little more slick, be a little more Ocean's 11 with it or something like that. And I had a lot of fun with those. I wish there were more heists in the game. The setup, even if it is kind of a false a false choice in a lot of ways, just being able to pick where you put your getaway car.
Yeah.
Little things like that along the way. All that stuff was just really cool. Like you felt like you were really setting up for a heist.
I mean, I think, what I felt is once they introduced some of those elements of choice, and then you would have later heists where they actually took away quite a bit of it, that was where kind of my frustration was. That, I thought these things were going to expand and become more complex.
See, I loved how the heist weren't the heist. How you do all this, legwork, and then you get on the ground, and then the Plante job is, I think, a great example where they've tricked you. You've provided the materials, but the reality is they're not going to tell you what the story of the heist is until you're in it. And I liked when things went wrong. The same thing even with that first jewelry store heist, where you have to escape through the tunnels, and it becomes something very different than what you thought it would be. I mean, for me, the Plante score was my high point for the game, where you don't really understand what you're building to, and it sounds like the most boring, simple thing on Earth, and then they just keep upping it to the point where I can see why it was hard for them to surpass it the rest of the game, because how do you keep upping past that volume?
Well, it's funny, the way that you describe it is, they instead of a proper heist like out of the movie Heat, they kind of took the end of every Scooby-Doo episode, where this elaborate setup is actually put together, but Shaggy or Scooby manages to just turn it into the same resolution, but among a far different path than expected.
Yeah, and I actually really liked all the quiet moments in the heists as well. Like that tension of just all this stuff is about to go wrong. You just don't know when. I mean, it's still a video game. At some point you're probably not going to walk out scot-free. And when you're walking out with the gold, when you're putting it in the car, when you're just like, okay, is this where it's going to jump off? Like, where's it going to jump off? This would have been a good place for it. Is this guy going to squeal? Are we going to have to is this going to go bad right here? And the tense moments there, I think those are my favorite parts of that entire game.
Well, and that money counter. I mean, that to me was so ingenious, because you start to see these numbers go up, and you're like, oh, and then you start to see them go down. You're like, oh, what do I got to do?
Stop dropping stuff. Stop dropping stuff. What do we do?
I mean, that was for such a small device. I was fascinated how much tension that could bring to the entire experience. I absolutely loved it.
Yeah.
Oh, Chris.
Oh, well, I was going to talk about the money, because the money is maybe my favorite, motif of the game. Because they make you focus on it so much. Like you said, this counter, it's going up, going down, but it's meaningless. It's the anti-Grand Theft Auto game, because the story is basically you can get money really easy, but getting out alive or keeping it is impossible. And that's the beginning of the game. He wants to get out, and what we learn is even after 20 or however many years, you can't get out. And then every mission you take after that first heist is just getting you in deeper. You get a little bit of money, and then suddenly there's always going to be somebody above you who has his thumb on your head, and you can't get comfortable. And I really like that the money just kept getting taken away from you. And I've had a few people who are halfway through the game like, I'm so frustrated. I'm having to play the stock market for 50 minutes to have enough money. And I'm like, but do you not have enough money to buy everything in the store that you want? I'm like, oh, yeah, but I just feel like I should have more.
Yeah,
like, well, then the game's doing it right. Yeah. Like, that's the whole point.
Yeah. And that really might be where they have the most on the nose social commentary.
Yeah.
Is that we have the money we need.
It's not
But
changing
you,
anything.
But you never feel
Yeah.
like you have enough. And that kind of explains 2008, which is definitely right there in the background of
Right.
Grand Theft Auto 5.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's. I thought that was really great in a lot of ways. It's weird because you go in and you go in thinking like the money is like your score, and you think like, okay, well I need a higher score. I need to be able to buy everything. I need to be able to buy every property and all this other stuff. It's like, yeah, you can go buy the movie theaters. I didn't actually buy a ton of the property. I bought the cab company because I knew that would be free cab rides and some missions associated with it, and bought a few things here and there. But at some point, it was just like, this isn't changing anything. The missions give you enough guns that you don't even necessarily need to go into the gun store ever.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, the economy and the challenge of the game are really running parallel to one another. They're not so synced up that by being really diligent about earning stuff, you're going to have kind of a smoother ride. Like, it is definitely the first GTA game I felt that was designed to ensure that you're going to see it through to the end, that you're not finding a motorcycle or something like that can really become a stopping point to getting to the game's conclusion.
Yeah, definitely. The missions are not difficult in that game. As long as you're patient, and remember to hide behind stuff, you will finish that game.
And to be fair, the driving was satisfying enough that I didn't mind going places, which used to be a huge hang-up for me when I played other Grand Theft Auto games.
Well, I think it helps that you can see things, right? Like, it's weird that we think of Grand Theft Auto games as games that belong in cities, but cities aren't fun to drive in. They're uncomfortable. They're claustrophobic. You can't see where you're going. And it's nice that once you get out of downtown, there's a lot of hills, so you always have a horizon line, or you're upstate. And I mean, the upstate area is, I think, the most beautiful area of the game, where it looks like Red Dead, just boosted in every way. And that's great, and it makes driving fun to actually have something pretty to look at.
So with Grand Theft Auto 5, and we're gonna have to come to the close of our show. It has made a lot of money. I think I didn't expect it to get to $1 billion in 3 days. I just thought I would like to get thoughts from both of you on what is that appeal. Like, this is one of, we talk a lot about, okay, Call of Duty's winding down in its appeal.
Yeah.
But this game only seems to increase, and it's something you can probably set your watch to now.
This is what you get when you only put out one every 5 years. There's no fatigue. People are ready for this game. People are asking about this game. You have people that don't play a lot of games that hear that this is coming out and they go like, well, I definitely have to get that. And you have it happening at the end of a generation when the install bases are huge. And people are, I think all that stuff lined up perfectly. There were a lot of people asking in the run-up to the release of the game, like, why would they put it out on current generation consoles and not just hold it for next gen? It's like, because there will only be 2 million potential customers out there for them, or 4 million, or whatever the number is, as opposed to the hundreds or whatever it is that they can get now. So I think that they picked the right place and the exact right time to make all that money. But they're going to find out that the money changes nothing for them.
Chris, I mean, do you think that this is something that the rest of the industry could take a lesson from, or can this only work because it's Grand Theft Auto?
Oh, it only works for them. Well, I mean, there's plenty of other ways to make a crazy amount of money, I'm sure, that people will discover. But what I would say is unique about this is we heard that $250 million budget, right? And that's a trick, because marketing usually is about half of whatever the budget they say it is. But even then, it's still absurdly large for a video game. What I think sets this apart from other games that we've heard big budgets from is that money appears to have gone into the actual development of this game. It's not like BioShock Infinite, where who knows how much of that money went into other versions of BioShock Infinite, or so many other big games that took a long time to make, and we know, or it's rumored that the development process, is a bit staggered, and they were kind of feeling their way to the door. With Grand Theft Auto 5, it feels like Grand Theft Auto 4 ended, and they were like, okay, we know what Grand Theft Auto 5 looks like. It's going to be a lot. We're going to take all that time, and we're going to put all that money into it. And, you might not like all the crazy stuff you can do in this game or how big it is, but you can see where the money went. And I don't know of any other developer that has the ability to spend its money as consistently as Rockstar appears to. And, maybe they have other issues with their development, but that is one thing that they really do seem to get right.
And it's funny. I look at that game, and I agree completely. I think it's really well put. But even with every dollar spent well. The idea that something like that only costs $250 is still one of those things that I can only imagine, and whoever was writing those checks, I tip my hat to their spine in not losing confidence during that time. I know there was so much more that we could talk about this game. This has been a conversation I've been dying to have myself, and there's about 2 hours more, but we can't do that because all three of us have other games that we have to be playing right now. The reviews, obviously, are at giantbomb.com and at polygon.com.
Yep.
All right, Chris, Jeff, thank you so much for joining us today, and that goes for all of you too. Thank you for watching Spoiled Games. There are other Spoiled Games that will be out in the future, but for the time being, go check out some of the other episodes and definitely check out the reviews on the site, including Grand Theft Auto 5. Do you like Rev3 games and you're also now interested in the idea of making games? Whether you're interested in programming, art and animation, story creation, or even producing games, there's a game degree program at Full Sail University to fit your needs. If you're looking for an online program, Full Sail's Game Art and Game Design bachelor's degree programs utilize Full Sail's immersive education platform, giving you the ability to earn your degree from anywhere in the world. And Full Sail grads have worked on titles such as Red Dead Redemption, the Call of Duty series, and more. Full Sail University also offers a variety of campus and online degrees in fields related to the entertainment and media industry, including art and design, filmmaking, recording arts, entertainment business, and many more. Visit fullsail.edu/spoiled to learn more.